Hi, this is Mrs. Chavez. By now, I hope you're ready to get started with your graphic organizer for 23.4. You should have already opened up another OneNote and split your screen and gone to the content library and pulled up section 23.4. We're starting on page 668. Also, you need to pull on the other OneNote, you need to pull up the graphic organizer. So the instructions are, as you read about Napoleon's downfall, write notes on how each action contributed to his final defeat. The first one is that Napoleon ordered a blockade to prevent trade and communication between Great Britain and other European nations. How did this end up leading to his downfall? Well, Napoleon's own personality proved to be the greatest danger to the future of his empire. His desire for power had raised him to great heights, and the same love of power led him to his doom. In his efforts to extend the French Empire and crush Great Britain, Napoleon made three disastrous mistakes. The first one was the continental system. In November of 1806, Napoleon set up a blockade, forcibly closing ports to prevent all trade and communication between Great Britain and other European nations. Napoleon called this policy the continental system because it was supposed to make continental Europe self-sufficient. Napoleon also intended it to destroy Great Britain's commercial and industrial economy. Remember, I've been telling you all along how much anger and how much revenge Napoleon wants to inflict on Great Britain. Napoleon's blockade, however, was not nearly tight enough. Aided by the British, smugglers managed to bring cargo from Britain into Europe. At times, Napoleon's allies also disregarded the blockade. Even members of Napoleon's family defied the policy, including his brother Louis, whom he had made the King of Holland. While the blockade weakened British trade, it did not destroy it. In addition, British responded with its own blockade, and because the British had a stronger navy, they were better able than the French to make the blockade work. So, take some time to write in your notes into that section in your graphic organizer, and then we'll move on to number 2. To enforce the blockade, though, the British Navy stopped neutral ships bound for the continent and forced them to sail to the British port to be searched and taxed. They were looking for smugglers. American ships were among those stopped by the British Navy. Angered, the U.S. Congress declared war on Britain in 1812. Even though the War of 1812 lasted 2 years, it was only a minor inconvenience to Britain in its struggle with Napoleon. So number 2 is Napoleon sends an army to invade Portugal. Why did he send the army to invade Portugal? Because Portugal was not abiding by the blockade. They're crucial in abiding by the blockade, and they weren't doing it. So this is when we get the Peninsular War. In 1808, Napoleon made a second costly mistake. In an effort to get Portugal to accept the continental system, he sent an invasion force through Spain. The Spanish people protested this action, and in response, Napoleon removed the Spanish king and put his own brother Joseph on the throne. This outraged the Spanish people and inflamed their nationalistic feelings. The Spanish, who were devoutly Catholic, also worried that Napoleon would attack the church. They had seen how the French Revolution had weakened the Catholic Church in France, and they feared the same thing would happen to the church in Spain. For 6 years, bands of Spanish peasant fighters, known as guerrillas, struck at the French armies in Spain. The guerrillas were not an army that Napoleon could defeat in open battle. Remember, that's the same problem that the British had with the American army, because they were guerrilla fighters. The British added to the French troubles by sending troops to aid the Spanish. Napoleon lost about 300,000 men during the Peninsular War, called this because Spain lies on the Iberian Peninsula. These losses weakened the French Empire. In Spain and elsewhere, nationalism or loyalty to one's own country was becoming a powerful weapon against Napoleon. People who had first welcomed the French as their liberators now felt abused by a foreign conqueror. Like the Spanish guerrillas, Germans and Italians and other conquered people turned against the French. So take some time to write in the notes that are highlighted in green into your graphic organizer, and we'll move on to the next one. And that would be in June of 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia with his grand army. Napoleon's most disastrous mistake of all came in 1812. Even though Alexander I had become Napoleon's ally, the Russian Tsar refused to stop selling grain to Britain. In addition, the French and Russian rulers suspected each other of having competing designs on Poland. Because of this breakdown in their alliance, Napoleon decided to invade Russia. Well, in June of 1812, Napoleon and his Grand Army of more than 420,000 soldiers, they were actually called that, the Grand Army, marched into Russia. As Napoleon advanced, Alexander pulled back his troops, refusing to be lured into an unequal battle. On this retreat, the Russians practiced the scorched earth policy, and this involved burning grain fields and slaughtering livestock so as not to leave anything for the enemy to eat. On September 7th, 1812, the two armies finally clashed in the Battle of Borodino. After several hours of indecisive fighting, the Russians fell back, allowing Napoleon to move on to Moscow. When Napoleon entered Moscow 7 days later, the city was in flames. Rather than surrender Russia's holy city to the French, Alexander had destroyed it. Napoleon stayed in the ruined city until the middle of October, when he decided to turn back towards France. So take some time to write in your graphic organizer. For number 3, it's highlighted in orange in your textbook. So Napoleon enters Moscow on September 14th, 1812, and he stayed in the ruined city for 5 weeks. Okay. As the snows and the temperature began to fall in early November, Russian raiders attacked mercilessly Napoleon's ragged, retreating army. Many soldiers were killed in these clashes or died of their wounds. Still more dropped in their tracks from exhaustion, hunger, and cold. Finally, in the middle of December, the last survivors struggled out of Russia. The retreat from Moscow had devastated the Grand Army. They only had 10,000 soldiers left to fight. Take some time to write in your graphic organizer. It's highlighted in pink in your textbook, and then we'll move on. So Napoleon's enemies were quick to take advantage of this weakness. Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Sweden all joined forces against him. Austria also declared war on Napoleon, despite his marriage to Marie Louise. All of the main powers of Europe were now at odds with France. So we're on to number 5. Napoleon raised another army and fought the Battle of Leipzig. So, in only a few months, Napoleon managed to raise another army. However, most of his troops were untrained and ill-prepared for battle. He faced the allied armies of the European powers outside the German city of Leipzig in October of 1813. The allied forces easily defeated his inexperienced army, and French resistance crumbled quickly. By January of 1814, the allied armies were pushing steadily towards Paris. Some 2 months later, King Frederick William III of Prussia and Tsar Alexander I of Russia led their troops in triumphant parade through the French capital. Napoleon wanted to fight on, but his generals refused. In April 1814, he accepted the terms of surrender and gave up his throne. The victors gave Napoleon a small pension and exiled or banished him to Elba, a tiny island off the Italian coast. The Allies expected no further trouble from Napoleon, but they were wrong. Take some time to mark number 5 box in your graphic organizer. It's highlighted in yellow in your textbook. All right, let's move on. So, Napoleon escapes, okay? He's on this island of Elba. He escapes and comes back to France and reclaims the title of emperor, and he fights his last battle at the Battle of Waterloo. So, in response to the European allies quickly marshaled their armies, the British army led by the Duke of Wellington prepared for battle near the village of Waterloo in Belgium. On June 18th, Napoleon attacked. The British army defended its ground all day. Late in the afternoon, the Prussian army arrived. Together, the British and the Prussian forces attacked the French. 2 days later, Napoleon's exhausted troops gave way, and the British and the Prussian forces chased them from the field. The defeat ended Napoleon's last bid for power, and also ended the 100 Days. He spent 100 days after he escaped from the island of Elba trying to regain his empire. Taking no chances this time, the British shipped Napoleon to St. Helena. This is a remote island in the South Atlantic, and there he lived in lonely exile for 6 years, writing his memoirs. He died in 1821 of probably stomach cancer. And without doubt, Napoleon was a military genius and a brilliant administrator. Yet all his victories and other achievements have to be measured against the millions of lives that were lost in his wars. The French writer Alexis de Tocqueville summed up Napoleon's character by saying, "He was as great as a man can be without virtue." Napoleon's defeat opened the door of the freed European countries to establish a brand new order. Take some time and finish number 6. It's highlighted in blue in your textbook. And that will end the graphic organizer for today. And we can move on to your vocabulary terms. Thank you.